You were told that money rewards talent, effort, and good decisions, and then you watch the real world prove something colder. Most people do everything right and still fall behind, while a tiny slice of society buys assets, captures leverage, and keeps getting richer. So let me ask you the uncomfortable question nobody wants to answer on finance channels. Is starting a business mostly luck, or is it something else? And why do so many people fail so loudly that you start to believe failure is your destiny? This is not financial advice, this is financial education. I am going to break down the mechanism behind wealth creation that most people never study. Not motivation, not mindset quotes, the actual engine trends, how they form, how they move money, and why understanding them matters more in 2026 than it ever did before. In 2026, you are living in a world where AI is wiping out entire categories of work that used to support middle-class lives. You are also living in a world where housing has permanently detached from wages in the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia. Inflation may have come down on paper, but your purchasing power still feels bruised. Real people are drowning while markets keep hitting highs. And your retirement math looks like a joke that nobody is allowed to laugh at. Now add one more layer. The wealth gap is not just widening, it is concentrating. The top 1% own more than they did in the early years of the century, and they are borrowing against appreciating assets at interest rates that ordinary workers can only dream about. At the same time, institutional investors have moved into crypto regulation, custody, and market structure so effectively that the freedom from banks story largely became a marketing line. So yes, starting a business is hard. If you think the hard part is building a product from scratch, the hard part is not creation. The hard part is timing. The hard part is being early enough to matter and late enough that you do not get crushed by reality. And here is the part nobody wants to say out loud. The reason most people fail to start a business is not because they are lazy. It is not because they are stupid. It is because they never learned how to open the correct door. They stand in front of a locked entrance and call it lack of courage, lack of money, or lack of intelligence. But doors are not unlocked by confidence. Doors are unlocked by keys. In the language of a billionaire CEO, the key is alignment with the wind. Imagine a pig perched in the air, and the wind is blowing in the right direction. Even a pig can fly, but if the wind is wrong, no amount of optimism will turn gravity off. The CEO of Xiaomi, Lei Jun, said something like this: entrepreneurship is about putting the pig in the right direction of the wind. When people hear that, they think it is poetic, but it is actually operational. It is an instruction to stop wasting energy on the wrong problem. You do not need unlimited courage. You do not need a perfect business idea. You do not even need huge capital. You need to detect a trend early enough that the market is already moving, and then you need to monetize it before the crowd arrives. Now let's make that real. During the early waves of the pandemic, people bought face masks like it was oxygen. Were you supposed to invent a supply chain? Were you supposed to write a business plan? Were you supposed to persuade people with clever marketing? No. They bought because the world changed. The demand existed immediately because panic and safety needs turned into a buying frenzy. The ones who were positioned correctly didn't need a genius pitch. They needed access to inventory, distribution, and the ability to move quickly enough that supply did not run out. And while some people laughed at buyers on social media, the reality was brutal. If they did not buy, they could not survive the disruption. Their reaction was normal. They were responding to fear and uncertainty. But the smart ones looked at the fear and saw a market signal. They did not ask, "Is this ethical?" They asked, "What is the trend doing to prices?" And when the answer was obvious, they acted. I am not teaching you how to profit from disaster. That is a cheap trick and it leaves moral rot behind. But I am teaching you how to recognize the underlying logic. Markets behave in predictable ways when human behavior shifts. People buy essentials. People hoard. People change their routines. Prices react. And if you understand how that ripple works, you can build businesses that ride the ripple instead of swimming against it. Pattern interrupt. In 2026, the biggest disaster is not always a single event like a pandemic. Sometimes it is a slow, grinding reordering of labor by AI, plus a stubborn inflation hangover, plus a housing affordability collapse that forces millions into renting longer. Those are trend engines. They create demand, they kill certain jobs, they reward new services, and the winners learn to watch the wind instead of asking for permission. Now let's talk about what trends actually are. Most people think a trend is a slogan, a trending topic, a viral video. In finance, a trend is not a mood. A trend is a mechanism that changes demand, changes supply, or changes both. There are two ways trends make money. One is price movement. The other is new demand creation. Price movement is the simplest to understand. When a major event hits, expectations break. Panic triggers selling, or shortages trigger price spikes, or both. If you can anticipate the direction and magnitude of movement, you can profit from the volatility. This is where many traders live. But even if you are not a day trader, the principle still applies. Trends create predictable price paths, and price paths create opportunity. New demand creation is the deeper one, and it is where most entrepreneurs should focus. A big event changes daily life. That change produces new needs. If you can identify those needs early and package a solution fast, you can make money even when the original event is gone. Think about smartphones. When smartphones became mainstream, most people thought about buying one. They focused on the hardware, the screen, the upgrade. But the real opportunity was what the smartphone did to life afterward. People spent more time on screens. Their eyesight worsened for many. Apps became the new infrastructure. Mobile internet access created an environment where searching and entertainment moved into the pocket, and then industries grew around that. App development exploded. Mobile commerce expanded. Even second-hand phone markets became busy because upgrades became constant. Meanwhile, physical businesses that relied on outdated attention patterns started to shrink. Now take that same logic into 2026 with AI. AI is not just a tool. It is a force multiplier that changes who can do what work. If AI can code better than most interns, then learn to code becomes a meme unless you also learn how to sell, distribute, and build defensible customer relationships. AI is raising the baseline skill level of production. That means the market rewards the people who can turn demand into outcomes, not the people who can only do tasks. That is why trends shift from tangible assets to distribution and attention. If you control the traffic, you control the game. But here is where it gets uncomfortable. You cannot monetize a trend if you only notice it when everyone already has. You need to detect trends before the crowd does. So the question becomes, how do you detect trends? You go to history. Not because history repeats exactly, but because history repeats in patterns of behavior. Human beings do the same things under the same pressures. The economy does the same things under the same constraints. When you study past disruptions, you learn what changes first. You learn what breaks. You learn what people buy immediately. You learn what gets delayed. You learn where the shortages appear. Pattern interrupt. Let me give you a micro story that matches how this looks for regular people. Picture a 32-year-old nurse named David. He works nights. He watches the news while on break. And in 2026, he sees layoffs in healthcare tech support, plus AI documentation tools rolling out. He feels that quiet dread. If AI can reduce paperwork, what happens to his shift hours? His manager says it is fine, it will create new roles. Then inflation hits his grocery budget again, and the housing rent rises in his city. He tries to follow the usual advice: save more, invest carefully, maybe start a side hustle. He starts watching trend videos. He thinks the trend is make content about nursing. He posts twice and then stops because he does not have an audience. He thinks he is failing. But the real trend is not content. The real trend is demand. People still need health navigation, affordable care, appointment scheduling, medication support, and caregiver resources. AI may change who performs paperwork, but it does not remove human needs. It changes the service layer. David does not notice that until months later. By then, the people who already packaged a solution are charging subscription fees, and the market has moved on to the next need. You are not lazy. You are just late, and being late is expensive. Now I want you to understand the two main categories of trends, because this is where you start thinking like a builder instead of a follower. The first category is time trends. Time trends are predictable because they are tied to calendars, seasons, holidays, school schedules, and recurring human behaviors. This is why certain products always spike, not because the product is magical, because human routine is predictable. Every year before major holidays, certain items sell out, certain services become crowded, parents plan in advance, consumers buy with time pressure. That is the market telling you the calendar matters. In the United States, in the UK, in Canada, in Australia, you can track these cycles. Summer in the Northern Hemisphere means different products than winter. Back to school drives demand for tutoring and health screenings. Winter drives demand for insurance claims and home heating. Election cycles shift spending patterns for marketing agencies and political consulting. These are not conspiracy theories. These are seasonal economics. The second category is event trends. Event trends are chains. One event causes a predictable reaction, which causes the next reaction. Event A changes behavior. That behavior changes demand or supply. Then the market reacts again. During the pandemic era, it was not just the virus exists. It was lockdowns, fear, travel restrictions, labor disruptions, supply chain bottlenecks, and rumors that created demand surges and shortages. Those created price spikes and order behavior. Then sellers adjusted. Then the cycle repeated. In 2026, event chains look different, but they still exist. AI policy changes affect hiring. Hiring changes affect incomes. Income changes affect consumer spending. Spending shifts affect retail and rent. Insurance market stress affects housing stability. Housing instability drives migration patterns. Migration drives demand for language services, relocation logistics, and temporary housing. You can map these chains if you stop thinking in slogans and start thinking in sequences. Now here is the real problem. Most people cannot detect trends because they are trained to look at the wrong data. They scroll. They watch viral videos. They read motivational posts. They treat information like entertainment. Real trend detection requires something else. You must ask what happens next, not what is happening now. You also have to zoom out. You cannot just ask what happens this week. You need to ask what happens in months, what happens in a year, what happens in 5 years. Pattern interrupt. In early January, people in many countries look ahead to spring events. They plan fitness, they plan weddings, they plan tax preparation, they plan vacations. That time shift creates demand even before the season arrives. The same logic applies to 2026's economic reality. If you anticipate that students will spend more time learning remotely or on devices, you can predict demand for eye care, learning supports, and tutoring technology. If you anticipate that employment becomes more unstable due to AI automation, you can predict demand for career coaching, credentialing, and income stabilization services. If you anticipate that climate-driven insurance instability pushes people into relocation, you can predict demand for moving services, housing brokerage, home resilience retrofits, and temporary housing networks. That is trend logic. Now, the next step is the most important step, and it is where many people stop. They detect a trend, but they never learn how to monetize it fast. Detecting trends is like sensing wind direction. Monetizing is flying the pig. So how do you monetize? You do three things relentlessly. First, you satisfy demand faster than competitors do. The market does not just reward good ideas. It rewards speed to market plus speed to trust. If you are first, you can capture the default choice behavior. Customers remember the first solution they used. Search algorithms reward early content. Partners align early, and when you are early, you can build a brand before price wars begin. Second, you attach to the demand layer that AI cannot easily replace. AI can do drafting. AI can do summarizing. AI can do basic customer service scripts. But AI still struggles with trust, accountability, and human context. In 2026, customers pay for outcomes. They want someone to handle complexities. They want someone who knows the rules and the edge cases. That means you can start businesses that focus on implementation, navigation, and support, not just content generation. Third, you solve the problem in a way that reduces customer pain, cost, or risk. People do not buy your product because it is clever. They buy it because it lowers their stress. Now let's connect this directly to 2026 realities so it is not abstract. Housing affordability crisis is a trend. When home prices detach from wages, millions cannot buy. That means demand shifts. In a world where you cannot buy houses, you create demand for renting optimization, tenant advocacy, relocation services, shared housing, property management, insurance comparison, home maintenance contracts, and even services that help renters build credit and improve stability. And because AI changes job stability, the demand for reliable cash flow planning increases. That means demand for budgeting systems, debt consolidation navigation, emergency savings products, and simplified financial education becomes larger. People will pay to reduce uncertainty because uncertainty is what kills households. Retirement crisis is a trend too. Social security is delayed, pensions are underfunded, and life expectancy rises. That means demand shifts to income planning, healthcare logistics, caregiver coordination, and retirement bridging services. Global debt exceeding $300 trillion is a background pressure that limits fiscal options. That pressure tends to translate into higher interest rates for longer, more volatility, and more selective credit access. When credit tightens, businesses that help people navigate credit becomes valuable. When credit becomes unreliable, services that reduce need for credit become valuable. And climate-driven economic disruptions create another demand cluster. Insurance markets collapse in certain regions. That triggers migration and repair needs. If you see that shift in insurance premiums and availability, you can predict that certain service categories become scarce, then expensive. Now, let's move from theory into money. There is a reason the wealthy think in patterns rather than in wishes. They do not ask, "What should I do to get rich?" They ask, "What problem is growing and when does it spike?" They build around the spike. Here is a clear time trend example. In many societies, at the end of major holidays, weight and health behaviors shift. People eat too much during celebrations. Then they experience guilt, discomfort, and health scares. They want solutions. A competitor sees the trend and opens a service close to the point when demand peaks. They target the time window, not the general fitness market. They schedule promotions earlier. They staff for the spike. The business has urgency built in. That is why time trend businesses can look like miracles. It is not luck, it is calendar math. Event trend examples are even more powerful because they chain. An event triggers a supply problem. A supply problem triggers price change. Price change triggers behavior changes in consumption. Behavior changes trigger new service categories. Now, the last layer that turns this into serious wealth is not just finding the trend, it is choosing the monetization model that captures more value than you give away. Most people try to monetize with brute effort. They create a service. They grind. They hope the audience grows. They work like employees even though they pretend they are entrepreneurs. The wealthy use leverage. Sometimes leverage is technology. Sometimes it is distribution. Sometimes it is a business model that turns one product into many transactions. Sometimes it is a marketplace structure. Sometimes it is converting a physical demand into a financial instrument. Let me explain with a holiday gift logic. Many people buy the same type of gift during a seasonal moment, but gifting creates an inefficiency. People buy too much, accept too much, and waste food or resources. In some markets, that leads to a secondary need. People want the value without the waste. So a smart operator creates a voucher system. Instead of shipping physical items that spoil or get rejected, they sell exchange rights. They buy back unused vouchers at a discount because many recipients will only use a portion. Then the operator sells the redeemed goods at a higher price to people who still want the physical experience. This is not magic. It is financial engineering applied to a simple behavioral cycle. The real profit comes from the gap between what people want and what the system wastes. That kind of model turns seasonal chaos into predictable margins. And now I want to bring in one more truth that hurts. Most people never build these models because they are trapped in the employee thinking mindset. They believe money comes from working for someone else who already solved the monetization question. But working for someone else means you trade your time for a fixed wage. That wage is vulnerable to automation. AI can replace routines. AI can compress labor costs. And if you rely on wages, you become a victim of the market's desire to reduce costs. In 2026, that is not theoretical. AI automation is already affecting call center work, basic analysis work, and even portions of coding pipelines. Some of it gets absorbed into new roles, but the distribution of who benefits is uneven. Many workers get squeezed while productivity gains mostly flow to shareholders and asset owners. So if you think the only safe plan is to keep doing the same job harder, you are choosing predictable suffering. Pattern interrupt.